6. Well, good morning, everyone. It is the appointed hour, and we will call to order the meeting of the Citizens Advisory Board for this special meeting this month. Amanda, do you agree that we have a quorum? Thank you. We have multiple items on the agenda. We'll move to item 2. David, you want to introduce that for us?
Yes, sir. If you remember last month, we gave a presentation on status of the program of each of the projects in anticipation of this award for ultimately what will come up is the park project. So we put together this presentation. We'll go back over some of it because I think there's a couple of you that might not have seen that last month, and also just to refresh your memory on where we are on everything, and then we will continue on with the park after that. So Mike Mize is here from ADG, and he will start off the presentation. Craig Freeman is also here to help us with the financial part, so I'd like to ask Mike to take over.
Mr. Chairman, board members, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As David mentioned, most of this presentation today is a repeat from last month, just because we know that not everyone was here to be able to see that presentation. Much of that presentation is exactly the same as it was before. When we get to the park, we obviously, one of the reasons we put this off, or made it a 2-month process, is because we now have the park bids in, and those are included in the presentation as well. So we wanted to just do a brief update about where we are today and get started thinking about the future with respect to possible use of available contingency and or excess collections funds. And actually, Craig Freeman, the finance director, is going to talk specifically later on in the presentation about the projected available funds as projected by the finance department. The budget numbers that you see in the general portion of the presentation are from April 10th. We don't have updated numbers. Some of those have been updated slightly, but I don't think there's anything in these numbers today that is materially different from where we actually sit once we see the next financial statement. And the park bid numbers that you will see are actually from Tuesday, March 9th, and they represent the actual bid we received. One of the things we wanted to start off with is the focus of this and the original intent of this was to deal with some issues with the park, specifically because of the timing of that right now. But we also recognize that all the other projects have some interest in what those available funds might be used for. We've come up with a list of what we think are factors that you might consider as not only as we go through this presentation, but as you deliberate later about how those potential funds might be used. And you've all had an opportunity to see these, but I think they're important. Has the project already received funds in addition to the I-Plan budget number? Have the project I-Plan expectation been met? Will the items positively impact project programming? Will the items increase operational efficiency? Will the items result in additional potential revenue? Is the request scalable? To say it another way, is partial funding of something an option? What is the impact to the schedule? And what happens if the items are postponed? So what I'm going to do right now is go through a brief summary of each of the individual projects and the current budget status as we understand it for each of the individual projects. And obviously, these are all of the projects. I'll start with the Convention Center, projected bid opening date of January of 2018. And based on the initial information that we have from the preliminary report, which has already been submitted and which you have seen, this project appears to be on budget. This is a summary of the overall Convention Center budget. Based on these numbers, we believe that with the current project balance of $214 million, we will have funds available to complete that project. Additional considerations that have been talked about with respect to the convention center, the one that's come up most often is a possible pedestrian bridge between the convention center and the hotel, or an alternate shaded area over 4th Street that would allow people to move between those two facilities without being totally exposed to the weather. Streetcar status, I think as you know, is very much under construction. We had the groundbreaking in February. We anticipate completion and possible operation in November of 2017. And as you are aware, the construction budget did come, the construction contract and bids came in under the budget. So the this shows you the original I-plan budget. We did, as you recall, add $3 million to this project when we talked about adding the Bricktown Loop. We were concerned that we would not have sufficient funds to do that. We added $3 million from contingency back in February of 2016 to cover that potential overage. That gave us a revised budget of 131. The current obligated is 121 million, which leaves a project balance of 10 million. A significant portion of that is the fact that the numbers came in under budget, and that also includes project contingency. And remember, when I speak about remaining contingency and excess collections, when I refer to contingency then, I'm talking about overall program contingency, not specific project contingencies. So, and that's what Craig will be talking about. Oops. There is a potential addition to the streetcar. It's the 5th Street turnback. We have, in fact, already ordered the special track to allow us to do that later on. That special track, which is the curved track and the switches, will be installed as part of the mainline contract, but the track that connects that special track work has not been yet ordered. The status on the river, Phase 1 is partially complete. Phase 2 is complete. Phase 3, which is the Whitewater, is complete. And Phase 4 is not complete. This is a summary, again, of the overall river budget, and we have a current project balance in the river budget of $95,000. There are a number of additional possibilities for spending money at the river, not the least of which, and I'll get it right this time, Mike, is completing the second floor of the Whitewater facility building. There are a number of other things, such as grandstands and additional lighting, that could be considered as well. Fairground status, love seeing this grand opening shot. I mean, we have completed that project. It is open, functioning extremely well. And that project has a current project balance of $2.5 million, which is in large part due to the very competitive low bid that we received when we originally bid the project. And the fact that we haven't used project contingency on that either. We, at this point, have not identified, nor has the Fairgrounds Subcommittee identified, any specific additional considerations for that project. Senior health and wellness, we're going to do this two different ways. We're going to show you first the overall budget for that category, which includes all four of the projects. The original budget was $52.3 million. You may recall that we've added some additional funds for Wellness Center number 1 and Wellness Center number 2. That actually for Wellness Center number 1, and that's taken the budget from the I-plan budget to $53.1 million. So that's the current overall budget for the senior health and wellness centers. This is the current status of the Wellness Center number 1. We did add a total of about $760,000 to that project, which increased its budget, and we have a current project balance of $227,000 for Wellness Center number 1. Wellness Center number 2, the original I-plan budget was $12,795,000. Current obligated is $12,003,000 for a current project balance of $417,000. But David, correct me, does that include the parking? It does not include the parking. So the parking budget, the parking bid came in at just under $600,000, I believe. So that will have to be a consideration as we go forward as well. Wellness Center number 3 has not yet been designed or bid. You may recall that early on in this overall MAPS 3 process, we had a lot of work that went on with respect to all 4 of the wellness centers. We were looking at how they could be operated, looked at locations. So there were a lot of expenses incurred that have impacted all 4 of the wellness centers. And this is management fees, and some of it is ADG fees. And we've spread those equally over the four different projects. That was only fair rather than try to load up the first project. So you'll see this current obligated of $326 here and in Wellness Center number 4 as well. And it was $326 on Wellness Center number 3, but because of the inflationary increase in Wellness Center number 4, instead of $326, that number is $338, as we've allocated it proportionally. Additional considerations for senior health and wellness centers, a possible 5th center, and depending on when that center would be built, we've used a projected number of potentially $15 million. Trail status, the West River Trail connection is complete. Will Rogers Trail is under construction. Lake Draper is in design, and the airport trail is not complete. This is the overall trails budget. We have obligated at West River Trail and Will Rogers Trail a total of about $27 million of the $39.5 originally budgeted, for a balance of $12.6 million for Lake Draper and the airport trails. The West River Trail budget, once again, a very favorable budget report on this because of the way the bids came in. We have a current balance there of $1.6 million. The Will Rogers Trail, once again, another very favorable set of bids, and an overall budget balance there of $3 million and $3.5 million. The Lake Draper and airport trail budget, the obligated funds that you see there are primarily design fees. That has not yet bid, so we have remaining for construction and design of any other trails, $11 million too. Additional considerations for the trails include things like signage, additional signage, water fountains, shelters, and restrooms. Sidewalk status, we currently have completed 51 alignment miles. You may recall that City Council took $9 million from excess collections some time ago and added it to the sidewalks projects, for which we were able to provide an additional 25 miles. That 25 is included in the 51. Sidewalk, and we've talked about this before. We've had some very significant sidewalk challenges. When we went through the ranking system, the areas that came up ranked the highest in need are very urban areas. There are lots of curb cuts. There are have been lots of utility conflicts. Something that we didn't anticipate at all. We're in at least one historic neighborhood, and what you see here is a retaining wall that we did not anticipate that we'd have to use, and it's been a very significant challenge to get to that 51 miles. The current sidewalk overall budget, we had $9 million. We've added $9 million. City Council's added $9 million for a total of $18 million. We've currently obligated $13 million, and that 4.8 that you see is remaining for Phase 4. Sidewalk considerations, pretty simple. Potential for additional miles. Park status, we saved this one for last. This was really, really good news for those of us involved in this. And before I get started, this really is a good news story, and I want to thank specifically the MAP staff and the ADG staff for working so hard on this project to help bring it in at this budget level. They did a tremendous job. The bid opening was May 9th, just last Tuesday. The projected Lower Park bid opening is not until right now, the first quarter of 2020, based on the I-plan schedule. This is the park overall budget summary. You see the total I-plan park budget of $132 million. We have, at this point, you'll see that there are two numbers up there for the upper park. We have allocated money between the upper park and the lower park several times, so that when we were early in the process, we determined that there was not enough opportunity for programming in the lower park. We moved some money from the upper park to the lower park. And then at one point in the design of the upper park process, we moved some of that money back from the lower park to the upper park. The current obligated funds that we have right now is $44 million, and you're going to see how the current bids impact that available budget.
Mike?
Yes.
Just one question. Do we understand from that slide that the net of those transfers back and forth were $5 million has been added to the lower park budget, and the upper park was reduced by $5 million?
I don't remember the exact numbers. I think
looking at these on the screen, it looks like 5.2 million.
the net is about a $5 million gain in the lower park.
And a $5 million decrease in the upper park?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. That is how that would balance out, correct. This is the upper park budget. It shows that we have available a construction total of $51.7 million. Now, the other thing we all need to remember is that as we went through this process of site preparation for the park, and I'll show you I will show you some detail about that, we ran into a tremendous amount of unexpected costs, which have added a significant amount to the upper park construction costs and actual expenditures there. This is the lower park budget. We have a current project balance for construction and for completion of design of $29 million, completion of design and project contingency of $29 million. Much of that current obligated is land acquisition and design and a little bit of design fees. So, Craig? I'm going to now turn this over to Craig Freeman, the city's finance director, who's going to walk you through where the MAPS 3 program currently sits with respect to potential available funds at the end of the day.
Thank you, Mike. On this first slide here, what we're going to look at is, and these are the same slides that we looked at from the April 27th meeting and went through, so we just wanted to use the same information. A couple of the numbers, and I'll talk about those as we go through, have changed a little bit, but still keeps us really on track for what had been projected. This first slide really looks at where we are to date on the actual sales tax that have been collected through April of 2015. April 15th of 2017. So we're at $714 million in sales tax have been collected. We're at $13.8 million in interest, and that's through the life of the program. And then there was some building rental that was collected. So it's $728 million has been collected through April. The slide at the bottom just shows, obviously sales tax is the largest portion of the revenue that we have available.
Craig, before you leave that, you said one thing I want to ask you about.
Yes.
Can you go back to that?
Yes.
What does it mean when you say that the interest earned is through the life of the program? Is this the interest that's been earned to date?
To date, through the life, yes, from the beginning of the program to date.
We'll continue to earn interest.
That's absolutely correct. Very good clarification. And so what we showed here is we wanted to compare what was originally projected for the program on that left-hand column in sales tax to come up with a $777 million budget. And as you recall, interest was not included in that estimate. We've done that in the past with MAPS programs. It really gives us additional flexibility if sales tax revenues fall below, or it gives us some flexibility on contingencies going forward. So that's just historically how we've managed that with the MAPS programs. So again, the numbers at the top here now, if you look on the top right, will show the sales tax, just like on the previous page, sales tax that have been collected through April. We have received our May sales tax check, and it was 2.6% growth over last year. It's the first check that we've had of growth in more than a year, and so very, very excited to see that it's in line with what the our economists had projected and presented at our budget workshop, and so it really aligns with where we were anticipating to be, just a little bit better right now, so still keeps us on track with what we had shown back at the April meeting. The sales tax that we show remaining, this is on the right-hand column, at $83 million. The basis for that was looking at exactly what we were estimating going through the end of this year and then projecting into next year's budget. The sales tax collections we'll have for the MAPS program, it ends December of 2017, but because of the delay in the way the sales tax is collected, we'll get another full check in January and then a partial check in February. So we'll get about 9 months, or with this, from this slide, it'll be about 10 more months of sales tax collections that we would have in there. So aligning the projections for this analysis with exactly how we're budgeting for our 2018 budget, we would project $83 million in remaining sales tax collections. If you look back over in the left-hand column where we aligned how much we were projecting to get to the $777 million, you can see that that was at $89.6 million. So if you backed up to the original projections that we made back before the MAPS program started, we took that and broke that down into monthly projections. If you took those monthly projections for the months that are remaining going through February of 2018, it'd be nearly $90 million. Right now, aligning with our budget, it's $83 million. And one of the things that's a little bit confusing is when you think about right now, we're about $27 million ahead of estimates for the $777 million. And so when you compare the 777 to what we're now saying is 797, it's only about $20 million. Why are we going to lose ground between now and going into the end of the program? Part of that is because we had gone a long stretch where our projections initially were conservative enough that we could even have a period where we had a decline in the actual sales tax collections but still exceeded the original MAPS targets. Well, last year we kind of crossed that line where we fell below what those original, we had enough decline for many months that we fell below those original projections. So now, even with growth, we're going to have some months going into the end of the year, into the sales tax, that we will fall below the sales tax collections. And as an example, I looked at our November projection from the original 777, we would have to have 14% growth in sales tax to achieve that. And that's not going to happen. And so just to clarify, that's why we're seeing this right now, not expecting all of that to be, to decline away, but we are expecting that we're going to lose some ground from where we've been, from where we are right now at about $27 million ahead of the projection. So that leaves us at a projection at the end of the program of $797 million. To date, as Tom clarified, to date in the program, we've collected $13.8 million in interest. We're projecting an additional $6 million through the life of the program. We were very conservative with this estimate, in part because of uncertainty with exactly how the projects will spin down, and as those projects spin down and we have less money to invest, as well as not knowing exactly what the interest income will be. I'm confident that we'll make that number and most likely exceed that, so I think it's a really solid estimate.
Excuse me, I have one question there. The 777 did not include the additional $10 million that the City Council voted to add to the sidewalks. Did it?
No, the original 777 did not.
Right.
That's right.
I know.
So it'll come out of excess collections, and I think as we go through this full calculation, I'll show you where that lands.
Okay.
And it'll be recognized. So it's a really good point, and we'll recognize that here. So our projecting is just under $20 million in interest income. So $797 million in sales tax, $20 million in interest. We have the building rental that we talked about earlier. It gives us a total estimate of $817 million in revenue for the MAPS program. This gets to the point of what you're asking about, Mr. Boatwright, on the $786,944 now on the project budget includes the additional excess revenue that's been committed. So from the 777 to the 786.9 on the budget, that incorporates that additional allocation for sidewalks and a couple of other projects. So that gets us down to excess revenue of $30.4 million. And you add to that the current contingency balance of $7.4 million, and that's the program contingency, as Mike pointed out earlier. It's a little bit less than that actually now, because at the last meeting there was about $500,000 that was committed. I think it was on Wellness Center 2. And so it's more like $6.9 million, but it's very close. And so we're still at about $38 million that we're projecting. So if you take the amount that we're over on the revenue with sales tax, and then you back off the amount that was already committed on contingency, we still come out to about $38 million that's projected in excess funds or available, the projected amount that's available for the program above what we have in the program budget now. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Craig, I have one more.
Yes, sir.
Did Russell Edmonds deal with the issue of the agreement with Amazon that the state has made, that they're paying money in lieu of sales tax, and that was going into effect April or May?
Right. So in our May check, we did get revenue from Amazon. So there's revenue that's recognized
So
there.
that's already taken into account?
It does not get incorporated as sales tax because of the fact that it's collected from outside of the state and brought into the state for use. It's recognized as use tax. So we do see that, but it won't show up in the sales tax numbers. It'll actually show up in use tax numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So that money's not going to flow to the MAPS program?
That's correct. It'll be in the MAPS operations fund or in the MAPS use tax fund, but not directly into the MAPS fund because it's only the sales tax revenue that's coming into the fund.
Which that MAPS use tax is to the discretion of the City Council.
That's correct.
Thank you.
But I think it's primarily been used to fund the MAPS office operations, is that correct?
So it's been used, the council passes resolution each year to determine how they want to use that, and historically, really since the MAPS for Kids program, it's funded the MAPS office as well as public safety, fleet, and equipment replacement. That's been the primary use of those funds.
Okay. Other questions for Craig? Craig, thank you for
Yes, sir.
coming
Thank
again
you
this
all.
month. Mike?
Thanks, Craig. This is a summary of where we were with the original, or where we are today with the original program contingency and and the substation allocation. This number, the 7.4, is the same number that Craig just showed you as the overall program contingency balance. This is where some of the, where we have currently allocated money from excess collections to these three individual projects, and that total is almost $10 million. The River Wellness Center number 1 and the $9 million for sidewalks, which is outside that $777 million thing. This is kind of a summary of the potential considerations that we talked about a little while ago. One of the things that's up there, in addition to the projects that I mentioned before, is a potential parking garage on the northeast corner, just northeast of the convention center. It would be north of the convention center, east of the hotel, at a potential cost of $10 million. Union Station is also included up there at plus or minus $10 million. That would be to provide a fairly significant renovation to Union Station. Remember that Union Station renovation was not included in the original park budget, so that needs to be done separately. And there are possible costs up there for some of these additional considerations, and we have not, for most of these, we have not provided exact estimates because scope has yet to be determined, but these are kind of best guess cost estimates on our part.
The last item on the alternates for the upper park, that number, I guess, based on the bids we received,
That is not
about $6 million.
That is not based on the bids we received.
It'll be about $6
That number
million less
is
than-
based on what our original estimates were for that, and you'll see some slides as we go forward that show the difference between that $11.5 million and what the actual bids came in. Good point, Mike. Thank you. This is a list of two things. One, why we are where we are with the upper park and why there's a potential to ask for additional funds. One is the $6 million that we experienced in overruns on infrastructure getting ready for the park, and then below that is a list of all of the alternates. We've also incurred additional expenses with respect to the design and programming of the park since the operator has come on board, and we'll get into those in just a minute as well. As I said, that approximate $6 million is really $6.1 million, and this is a list of the kinds of ways that we spent that additional $6 million. And then the additional facilities, the additional programming that we talked about has two really overall purposes. One is to provide an opportunity for additional revenue generation for the park, and the other is to increase operating efficiency in the park over the long term.
Mike, if I make a point to the overrun on the utilities before we move forward, I just wanted to remind everybody that those decisions on the utilities were not just made specifically for the park's needs as of the days of during its construction or as it will be built. It was made for all of downtown Oklahoma City for future, maybe to the next 25 years in needs, so that it was a decision that benefited not only other MAPS projects that touch that, but also the project itself.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and maybe the best example of that is there's about a 90-inch storm sewer that runs across the lower end of the upper park that will be required for future use for the downtown, that particular area of downtown. We determined that it was in the park's best interest to upgrade that. That line was nowhere near that big before. We've upgraded it to accommodate for the city's future use, knowing that at some point, even if we had not done it, the city was going to have to come in later on and dig up the park to put that additional size line in. So it benefited the park long-term, but the cost was all absorbed by the park budget.
Mike, I also have a question. Mike, remind me, the alternates that we're looking at there, except for the number 9, were all of those suggestions by Mary Gardens folks that would be really important to increase operating revenue?
No. There's a combination of things at work, Mike, and one of them is exactly that. Some of those items do have that impact and benefit. The other thing is, because we had spent that additional $6 million and more on infrastructure, we recognize that the original budget that we had we would not be able to meet. So a number of things were taken out of what we would have hoped to be included in the park basic bid, the base bid, in order to try and get closer to that $52 million in available funds that we have. So both of those things are at work there. Does that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay.
Mike, I've got one more question for you, and it's not really related to the park thing here, but one of the considerations that we did in the streetcar is there was a $10 million matching fund that we gave for the upgrade of the Santa Fe station to get federal matching funds, but we paid for that out of the streetcar. So was that originally considered, the $10 million?
Yes, that was always in there.
Yeah, originally the budget was the original I-Plan budget was about $130 million, and 10 of that had always been assumed to be used for the station project. The bid that we received from Downey of $46,700,000 compared to the Hargraves estimate was $49 million. So this is a very, very favorable bid that we received from Downey. The total of the alternates is very close to what we had originally anticipated it was going to be, but it brings the total, if we were to do the entire base bid and all the alternates and award a contract to Downey for all that work, it would mean a contract amount of $58.5. One of the things that we have done subsequently since then is we've revised that based on a couple of things. We have deleted alternate number 8, which is work that we had anticipated to try to do around Union Station. The FTA, the Federal Transportation Authority, still had, they provided some funding for Union Station and for the land around it. And in order for us to use other money to even improve that site, we have to have an agreement with the Federal Transportation Authority. That agreement is currently in negotiation, but until there is an agreement with the FTA, we can't go in and spend these funds on that project to improve the grounds around Union Station. So we are suggesting not accepting alternate number 8 because in reality we couldn't go in and spend that money today anyway. Alternate number 9 is a water main replacement worth about $140,000. We're leaving that in, but we've highlighted it in red because the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust has effectively agreed to pay for that. So MAPS funds will, it's a little more complicated than this, but MAPS funds will be reimbursed for that. It will not be a direct cost to MAPS, which leaves a total balance of $57.5 million that would be awarded to Downey if we were to do the base bid and alternates as we're showing up here right now.
So the 140 for the water main replacement is included in the Downey contract. It's just expected to be paid not by MAPS funds, but by the water utility.
That's correct. So if we compare the bid award amount of that I just showed you on the previous slide of $57.5 to the current available construction balance, that leaves an additional funds required balance of about $5.8 million. One thing I would like to say before I move on is, for those of you who are not familiar with Downey, Downey's a local contractor. Downey will self-perform a lot of this work. They were the contractor on the Whitewater facility, and I think if you talk to anyone on my staff or the MAPS staff, they would tell you that Downey did a very, very good job on that project. And actually, there's a representative from Downey here today, but they are highly qualified to do this project. So, with that,
Mike, to just clarify then, the 5.7 million on the bottom of this slide is now the number that we're talking about back on your slide of additional considerations where we had the 11,600,000 for Upper Park alternates. That number, instead of being 11,600,000, is
No.
5,700,000.
no,
No?
it's not. Because the 11,600,000 is the total of the alternates.
Okay,
If you add that 11 million, the 11,600,000 is just the alternates. That 5,700,000 includes the difference between, the 11,700,000 would have to have it reduced by the difference between the Downey bid and the available cash that we have.
well, let me rephrase the question.
Okay.
In the additional considerations, we were anticipating that the park would come to the board asking for perhaps 11,600,000 in additional funds for the Upper Park. And now that ask is 5.7.
Before the bid was received.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. And yes, that is that.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to say,
You could easily look at it that way.
okay.
Yes.
I mean, there may, how you get there, but I mean, we have these list of things we think people might need and want, and we were anticipating 11,600,000 from the park.
Correct.
And due for the bidding from Downey and some engineering and some other things. It now looks like that number that they're asking
now
for is
reduced that ask.
5,700,000 instead of 11,600,000.
Yes. Yes, sir. Any other questions?
Further questions for Mike?
I will just make one, I guess, additional comment. A lot of numbers here. I eat them up, that's fine, I'm an accountant. But just to kind of, I guess, summarize the whole issue here is, we have a presentation from Craig that indicates we think we have about 37.8 million in additional funding from various sources.
And that will be reduced by about 500,000 or 600,000 with the Wellness Center number 2
Right, okay.
parking lot.
Yeah, so 37 million roughly that we have available, anticipate having available for various different needs. And on the list of additional considerations, you've given several of those needs that have been identified at that point. And that list, with the adjustment, I think, that we just talked about, would total about 55 million. So we have about 55 million worth of wants, needs, desires by the various committees and other people, and we have about 37 million to meet those needs. Is that,
I think
that's the gist of it?
I think that's a
think so.
reasonable
Okay.
summary. Just remember those estimates that we have for some of those additional considerations are very preliminary, very conceptual. They're not based on actual programming or planning.
and the 37 million is strictly program money that's available, and they're still, within some of the committees, they have their own contingencies and own projects that haven't been funded yet, and so potentially other issues that come up. So there's other things within the committees
Well.
yet, too, that can either,
Right.
that will affect the ultimate outcome.
But I'm not sure that this body has had any real specific deliberations yet about what to do with additional project
No,
contingencies.
I'm just saying this may not be the last list of needs.
Right.
Nor is it the only source of funds for some of those needs.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct. Anything else?
Any other questions? Well, to do this in an orderly fashion, I'm going to let David make whatever comments, then as most of you know, the Park Subcommittee met yesterday, so I'm going to ask Kim and Mike for their comments, and then the rest of us will chime in after we hear what they said. So, David, let's start with you.
Right, well, the subcommittee, Park Subcommittee met yesterday and had much discussion, went over an hour on this subject, and ultimately what they did is they broke it into two pieces to award. They voted to award the base bid and alternates 1 through 7 and 9, knowing that the water department is going to pay for the water line. It's a 12-inch water line that extends right there in front of Union Station, and it's not in the way, but it's 100 years old. I just want to point that out, why they decided to go ahead and replace it. It's 100 years old. It's not leaking or anything, but thought it was a good time to go ahead and replace that so that we weren't digging up a park 6 months after it opens to replace the water line. So they voted to approve that, and then in their second motion, they voted to ask for contingency funds to fund the $5.5 million that we're talking about.
All right, thank you, David. I'm going to start with Kim and then Mike. You all were there, the chair and the co-chair of the Park Subcommittee, and I want to begin by congratulating both of you. This is a happy day to bring us to this point. It's a benchmark day, so we're glad to get the chance to consider this. Kim, you're first.
Well, and I would say it's been a benchmark week starting Tuesday, knowing that there were bids in the office, and we were really excited when we received the bid from Downey and just their track record. And I think they set the bar really high for the river project, and we know we will have that same expectation, and I think fulfillment's here. We did have a lot of great conversation yesterday at our meeting. We actually had one of the largest quorums ever, which was wonderful. We introduced a new board member too, and Jane Jarrell Gamble, very excited about having her along as well. And Mr. Tolbert was there representing the foundation as well. So it was a day of celebration. I think it was also a day of relief too, as we will all remember that, for the last several months we've talked about underfunding on this project, and I've been touting a number around $10 million. So when the number came in, I almost felt as excited as when I bring a receipt home to my husband and tell him everything was on sale. So, so we were very excited about that. And our discussions ran the gamut. I mean, we talked a lot about where all these alternates came from, why they were listed as alternates, a lot about what our new operator has brought to the picture, and telling us, pointing out, I should say, things that needed some investigation, certainly on best practices of what we have found in Oklahoma. Hargraves listened, and listened quite well in understanding that any successful project with an operator involved needs to have a lot of attentiveness to what they have from their proven track record. And that's one of the reasons that Hargraves was actually selected to be our advisor on this project, because they bring twofold to the situation, not just the architect and landscape design element, but also on the program element, because the charge of this subcommittee was twofold: to build a park and also to build it in a way that can be revenue producing for the success of this in the future. We also talked a lot about the fact that what we're building in this park today is not for us. It's not for me or Mike or the subcommittee members, but it's for our children, it's for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and all of those who will inherit Oklahoma City and what they're responsible for and the things that we are creating through MAPS 3. And hopefully the decisions that we make now will also influence voters to understand that this is a great project, a great franchise, and there needs to be a MAPS 4 and maybe even a MAPS 4 million. That being said, when it all comes down to this park and to this project, I feel that we have a great responsibility to the citizens to deliver exactly what it is we've been talking about since the beginning survey and those very public meetings where we got a lot of input from people on what was needed. I know there's been a lot of talk about some of the amenities, including the fountain itself, and it's a major component to the project, but it's also an important major component to the project. It is the only part of the project that offers the public a cool respite on those days where we know can get very warm and very humid. It's a beautiful sculptural part of the park, which also serves as a main attraction for the convention center, who's going to be our very welcome neighbor. There's a lot of people that have spent a great deal of time planning something for this park in all of these amenities that not feed into the scope of what we promised on delivering, but also on making a park that can ebb and flow and grow within the city for the next 25, 50, and 100 years, which is the biggest part of the charge that our mayor and city council asked us to do. So I feel very comfortable that we've brought all those things to the table. The biggest challenge we have now is where do we get that funding from? So all along this whole process, I think we've spent many hours in due diligence designing this project to our budget, being very responsible and very respectful of that. We've had to add a couple of things along the way and hit a few bumps, including a big bump in $6.1 million worth of utilities. You know, had our city council, our mayor, our city manager, and everyone who sat down at the table and talked about these projects before they ever became an election item, had they known what we were sitting under, I truly believe that the budget for this project would have been more. I mean, obviously, they knew that there was a substation there. They knew that they had to allocate money for that, and rightly so. But I think we had a little bit of a surprise when we opened up that ground. So if we look at this whole project from that respect, if we were to back out what we had in utility overages, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. Because in our charge, we designed the park within the budget that we had to make the promises that we had. So yesterday we talked a lot about should we ask for these contingency funds? Should we not ask for these contingency funds? And I could speak on several sides of that coin. I serve a responsibility on that subcommittee, but I also serve a responsibility here and a bigger responsibility to the state of Oklahoma and all the citizens that are here. And from that subcommittee yesterday, we voted that we should ask for those excess collection fees because it is our responsibility to recommend the best way, we believe, for having that park constructed to the promises that we have outlined. Now, certainly, we now have that opportunity to look at this again here at this table before the contract is fully written and then taken back again to the subcommittee for approval and back through you to approval and ultimately to City Council. But I think I would ask you to consider that not from the fact that we are frivolously designing things in a park and running a budget up, but that for reasons beyond our control, we're having to ask for excess collections to make the park a successful part of our community. We talk about the convention center as the city's living room. We use it far more than other conventioneers do. And if we're building a grand living room in our city, we need to have a great yard for that living room to celebrate in, for all of Oklahoma City to celebrate in. So respectfully, I do carry forward what the Park Subcommittee voted on yesterday, and I ask you to also concur with me as well. And I'm sure Mike would like to make some statements.
Mike, before you start, I want to make, let's see now, do we have two pieces of this? One thing you voted first to do the alternates except alternate 8, right?
Yes, and with the understanding that alternate 9
would be
with the understanding that alternate 9 will originally be paid for out of the MAPS program, but then reimbursed, if you will, from the Oklahoma City Water Trust.
And then, David, that's pretty much what's included in the in the resolution that we have in front of us, right?
Well, we don't have actually a resolution, but that is the motion that someone could make.
Your recommendation about how it's to be funded for the council to consider as well.
Yes, I actually was
Okay,
going
so
to
two
ask to
pieces.
make those recommendations, but I wanted to let Mike have a
All right.
opportunity to speak his
Mike,
mind.
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom and Kim. Yesterday, when I spoke to the subcommittee, what I said to the subcommittee is that I was wearing both of my hats, considering both of my hats, that is, serving on the Park Subcommittee as well as serving on the advisory board, and that my concern going forth about asking for some almost $6 million in contingency funds had to do with going back to, and I will remind you all what happened last December when I came forth asking this body to recommend that the council approve a resolution to consider a fifth wellness center. And there's quite a discussion about that. And discussion really tabled around the fact that all of the subcommittees had wishes and desires going forth. And that I listened very, very carefully to several members on this advisory board who are actually here, of course, today. And they made a good case for me. And that is that at that point, we hadn't bid the two largest projects. And we also hadn't asked all the subcommittees to look at what their wishes and desires and needs might be. Of course, it would be expected that each subcommittee is fired up about their project. That's what they have spent years and years working on, and I certainly understand that. And that was obviously the case yesterday. But what my concern, and which is why I didn't vote to support this resolution, has nothing at all to do with the merits of the importance of all of these alternates being included in the park. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with the fact that going forth, there are still so many uncertainties that that may come upon us, that we may have to make decisions that we need more money to do, and they may be more emergency. There may be other issues regarding, we're not done with all the wellness centers. We haven't even bid the convention center. And I know things can happen. Kim talked about the several, $6 million that was spent when we tore up the ground for the upper park. We haven't torn up the ground for the lower park. I look at the issue of the second wellness center, and David will remember this. I was so excited when we found that site. We thought we had this perfect opportunity to couple Capitol Hill High School with the Senior Wellness Center. And we would not have to purchase the land because the land belonged to the Parks Department, and we could use the parking lot of the school, and we were going to have a clinic in the center. Well, lo and behold, as we learned, that the land didn't belong to the school, or to the Parks Department, that in fact it belonged to the school. So we worked out this, at that time, wonderful agreement that we were going to build tennis courts, and we had an understanding with the school board, although a technical board resolution had not been passed. And there, at the end, after we had designed all of this going forth, and it was financially still going to make a lot of sense in terms of dollars. And then we had someone on the school board who decided they didn't like that idea. And so what resulted is that we added some $600,000 worth of parking. I say all that to say that was unexpected. If we would have known all that was going to turn out that way, we would have never selected that site, because although it was an ideal location because we were next to a school and there's some synergy there and some relationships there, the fact of the matter is we would have financially been more feasible to go a block away. We don't know what's going to happen going down the road. So I voted against asking for contingency money to fund these, however warranted these alternates are. And was not very popular, I can tell you. Having said that, someone who is a lot smarter on this advisory board, everyone on this advisory board is a lot smarter than I am, but in terms of someone who really knows numbers, and Michael Adams came up and threw an idea out to the group that made a lot of sense to me. And I think, Michael, if it's okay with you, I'll shut up and let you kind of raise that, if that's okay with Tom?
Sure.
Absolutely.
I attended the park subcommittee meeting and listened in there and did offer a suggestion. I had no issues with the list of projects and advancing the needs of the park committee. The parks reviewed that. They've lifted those orange. They've designed the park they think is the community needs and wants, and I'm all for advancing that. My only suggestion came from on how to go about funding that. And so they are proposing, I think, that we fund it out of the program contingency funds, the top-level contingency funds that the board has. And I think that I would like to suggest an alternative to that, and that is that they had previously reallocated between the upper park and the lower park $5.2 million. I think we saw that they had taken $5.2 million out of the upper park budget and allocated to the lower park. And so I would suggest that that first be reallocated back to the upper park, and that be applied to this number. That leaves us about $500,000, which could be dealt with also, I think, within the park. They have $4.2 million in contingencies for the upper park fund, so that $500,000 could be dealt there. I would just like, and I'm trying to do this from a point of conservativeness and to try to maintain our flexibility here. We have, we've seen other committees when they've been dealt with these issues try to deal with it within their own committee, within the budgets they had, and I think that was the way that we started trying to approach these things, and I think that's good, and that puts us in a cost-conscious mode. If we fund this out of the $37 million, basically some piece of that $37 million, that kind of limits our options on all that other list of things we had there. That's a fifth wellness center that may not be able to build. It's 15, 20 miles of sidewalks we may not be able to do later. And I would like to just maybe have it dealt with within the park committee first. And so that would mean that within a couple, well, by the end of this year, early next year, we'll have the bids in on the convention center. We'll know if we have any issues there. And then the lower park, which I guess is probably the last project on the list, when it comes up, if they don't have enough money to do the things they need to do and fill there, that will be put on our list. And then we'll have the list of the fifth wellness centers and the needs of the lower park, any overruns that might have come out of the convention center. Maybe putting some money toward Union Station or the parking garage, or all those things. We still have the flexibility to do that stuff. We haven't chewed up some of our contingency right now, and we've dealt with that, I think, in a proper and a cost-conscious manner. So my suggestion would be, I guess, the first resolution I'm okay with. The second resolution, I think we're going to hear to fund it out of program contingency. I would like us to consider that we go back and ask the park committee to deal with that within their own committee, their contingencies and their remaining budgets first, and then when we come back later on and find out what the true needs of the park committee altogether are for the lower park, and that's so we're not piecemealing it as we go, and we're not limiting our flexibility and preventing us from doing maybe some of the other things we might want to do later.
Thank you, Mike.
I'd like to jump into the discussion, if I may. Kim, I appreciate what you're saying very much about the park. I'm very much behind it. Mike, I understand exactly where you come from, and I agree. Mike, I think that's a great idea. I'd like to throw in on the bandwagon here. In the presentation, we talk about the Draper Lake and Airport Trail budget. That's two distinctly separate trails on two opposite sides of the city. And if I'm not mistaken, the Draper Lake Trail is longer than any of the other two trails that we've already built. And their budgets are exceeding what's left for those two trails alone. So we're already behind on the trails. So that means we're not even going to get an airport trail at all, period.
No, the Draper Trail is within budget.
Is it?
Yes, yes. There's excess money within that.
Okay. But the airport trail then, but it's completely off. I mean, there's no way we can do that. Last month, that was part of the presentation that we're looking at connecting with some planning grants that might be able to be used to leverage those funds and help do some trails like connecting the river with the Grand Trail, some of that stuff. There is some excess money still out there that we need to look at as a subcommittee to see what we're going to do. So it is not a zero. But it's probably not going to be in MAPS 3. I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I don't see how
I understand. I think that there is a possibility to do something down there. Now, doing 8 miles of trail as the master plan from 10 years ago showed, probably not. but there is opportunity to do something as that evolves down there.
Yeah.
The master plan is evolving.
And I'd like to throw in, too, that while the construction for the streetcar is going very well, it's under budget, the cars are under budget, we're looking good, there are some priorities that would make that system much more revenue positive than it is currently going to be, some ideas that were thrown around. So I think there's an opportunity there to apply some of the contingency funds to something that would be a very positive revenue generator. And I look at the list for the parks, and I apologize for not being there and understanding the details of them, but, trellises, and help me out here.
Those are some of the items that, as we worked with the foundation, the operator, felt like those are some things that could help them with revenues.
Okay.
And bring in more people, bring in more
climbing-
revenues. The
climbing
trellises are
limbs,
set up for
trellis.
areas for like weddings and meetings and those kind of things.
But to me, it seems almost like those are, wow, we'd really like to have them, and yeah, that would be positive. Some of these other things, I think, are going to pop up as gotta haves, or you don't have it.
Well,
So I think we're a little early jumping out here on some of the things that...
Mr. Colbert might want to speak to this, but I think it's safe to say that they feel like these are items that are must-haves as far as generating more revenue. That was something that we talked about several times, is if we can spend money up front a little bit to help with revenues that would offset any kind of subsidies that the city would have to give to the operator, that would be a great thing. So that's what you're seeing here, the shade pavilion, the trellises, and then the additional playground areas are added attractions for people to come into park.
And I also think that some, like when we see the fountain, I mean, we look at that and say that's, it's one of the biggest things. It's not just the fountain. I mean, the fountain has a large decorative retaining wall that separates Robinson from people in the park. It also has a long, huge bench for seating area. So it's not just a fountain itself, but it's all the components that make up that entire plaza, if you will, because it's a huge area. So it's more, this list makes some of these things seem very simple when they are a little bit more expansive than what you're seeing here in words. And Mike, we talked a little bit about, okay, can we borrow from Peter to pay Paul, and looking at, what we've done back and forth between the lower park and the upper park. And if you remember, along the way of deciding the upper park, we stopped and said, okay, we're kind of having a hard time imagining what we should do in the lower park without understanding the lower park. So we said, why don't we do a preliminary design on the lower park? Because the two projects have to complement each other. We don't want to duplicate. We wanted to look at what was going to happen on Wiley Post with a $9 million general obligation bond issue coming up. There was a stretch of the riverfront that's owned by the River Trust that didn't have any programming designed for it. And so without just errantly designing a park, without even having an operator on board, or not looking at all the tangibles around it, we stopped and said, okay, what can we do in the lower park that would complement that? And the upper park being heavy programmed in the real core of our downtown area, we looked at the lower park with a more open concept, a little more prairie, a little more undeveloped, so that it was a totally different type of experience too, and maybe something that more blended in with the river. And so we put a preliminary report together for the costs of the lower park. And as a matter of fact, we'll see an updated preliminary report next month when Hargraves returns to the park subcommittee. The preliminary report was designed based on what we have allocated currently for the park. And when Hargraves showed that to the park subcommittee, there were a lot of flags that were thrown up. There's zero irrigation in it right now, zero. So it's kind of hard to have a park without irrigation. So we know we're going to have to add irrigation in the park. There also is utility, or not utility, but there are remediation costs that are going to have to be done in that area just because of what is sitting on that area and what has been sitting there for so long. So I'm not a designer or by any shape of the means, but it doesn't take much common sense to look at where we're at and what we have and already know we're already going to be challenged in the lower park with what we can do and what we're going to be faced and what our operator needs, again, to be able to support that, because we are building a park as we were charged to remand it to an operator to operate, and operate as profitably, as quickly as possible, and do everything in their means to do that. So if we're not providing them those things, it's difficult for them to make that part of their expectation. The same thing when we designed the wellness centers. I mean, we had a lot of those operators in place. And that was a great thing that you'd said from the very beginning. We've got to get an operator on board, got to get an operator on board in the park. And thank you to our city manager and our mayor and everyone in working with all of the powers that could do that. And I feel very blessed that the Myriad Gardens stepped up and said, okay, we can do it, because they have that experience. And also, as far as the land goes, we didn't choose where the park was. We were told where the park was going to be. I mean, we had some choices in other projects about where land could be or where we could pick that. We didn't pick it. I mean, we inherited it. So I think we've done the best we can with what we have to satisfy all the needs. And I can tell you that at my pay grade, which is a very low number, I can't make the best decision. But what I think I can do is carry forward what our subcommittee as a whole, based on the MAP staff work, ADG's work, and our consultant works, believes, and that is to build the park that we have now and take those monies out of excess collections.
Well, Kim, for us to, let's think about this. Would you like to make a motion regarding the piece of it about accepting the bid and accepting the alternatives as recommended, and then we'll consider that, and then we'll talk secondarily and secondly about the funding that we would recommend. But let's talk about the add alternates. Can we do that? You want to make that motion?
Yes.
Isn't that what the committee did, the subcommittee did?
I want to make sure we get it clear. You haven't made your motion yet, but you were talking about accepting the bid for the park and the contingencies at the same time?
No, not the contingencies
No,
at the
it'll be
same time.
two
Just shall we?
separately. Yeah.
Yeah, I am saying accepting the recommendation that the subcommittee brought forward, which David laid before us.
Right, which is the first part.
If you'd like to state it.
That includes the alternates.
That includes the alternates except for the one that's included for the Union Station, number 8. And so we vote on that. Or you can make a motion if you like.
Here's
And
what
then
I
we'll
would
discuss it more. This isn't shutting the discussion.
Sure.
But we need to have a motion.
purposely stating it. The motion would be to say that in addition to awarding the base bid, we recommend including alternates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9 in construction contract for the MAPS 3 Upper Park Project M3P006, with a note that alternate number 9 will be funded through the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust, not directly through MAPS funds.
All right. Are we together on the motion? Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded, and the motion you have heard. Is there further discussion? Yes.
Again, this is sort of confusing for me because I think there's got to be a way to know how we're going to fund this. I would support this measure, as I said yesterday, if it did not include going and asking for contingency funds. I would support it. In keeping with for me personally, just I can obviously speak only for myself and not our wellness subcommittee, I voted against when we asked for $159,000 that came to this board to supplemental funding for the second wellness center, and I know they needed those what they needed to do. Having said that, I did it because of what I understood the wisdom of this advisory board was in December is that we weren't going to be asking for going to contingency funds until we had all of the other needs of all the other subcommittees. So what I'm trying to say is that I would support this proposal and this motion if the funding was coming from the lower part budget, as Mike suggested. But I will vote against it if it's asking so we know what the funding is coming from. Is there a way we can figure that out? Is what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense? The question.
Well, all we're going to do is to recommend whether or not we want to accept this bid and whether or not we want to include the alternates in the bid, and then we're going to decide about the funding. But those decisions will be made, of course, by the council. So all we need to do is decide whether or not we want to move this forward with the recommendations. Within this framework, I think it's kind of important for us to think about, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have 30 days to accept the bid or not. And so this isn't a matter that we can wait until the convention center bid comes in next December. We're either going to accept this or we're not, and then they'll be released from it if we don't get this completed. I don't have to tell you, you already know that we had one bid. And so if we don't accept this, then they'll be released from it. If we don't, the council will make the final decision. But I'm not trying to persuade you, Mike. Vote however you like. But we have a motion before us, and the motion is to move them forward. Yes. Bob.
Mr. Chairman, I think there may be some value. I understand the need to have, in effect, separate motions to deal with the two components of this, but and I've seconded the motion to get the discussion underway. I think, though, that before we vote on the first one about accepting the bid that would include the 8 of the 9 alternates, I think we at least have to have some consensus on this board that there will be some funding source if we recommend approval of the bid with alternatives. Now, whether that funding source is moving some money from the lower park, whether that funding source is from contingency, I think we at least need to be comfortable that we have some funding source that would support those alternatives. Once we're satisfied that we have some funding source, we can debate and disagree among ourselves as to which is the better one of the two that have been discussed at this point. As long as we're comfortable as a body that we have some funding source to support all those alternatives, then we can vote on the motion to approve the bid with those alternatives, then move to the issue of which funding source we want to recommend.
Well, I think the purpose of having Craig here today was to assure us that we do have excess funds. I mean, we can afford to do this if this is what we choose to do. We might choose to do something else with the excess money, but I left Craig's presentation thinking that we have excess money, that we have money in the project, in the MAPS overall contingency fund, that we have $37 million in money that has not been allocated as yet. So I left his presentation, Bob, thinking there is no doubt that we have the money. The question is, do we want to spend it on this?
And I share that overall view. I don't want any member of this body voting against this motion for fear that by doing so, they've confined themselves to voting for use of contingent money.
I get you.
Rather than perhaps another alternative like Mike has proposed.
And in all actuality, no matter what the recommendation of the subcommittee is, no matter what the recommendation of the board is, when it comes to city council, they could make any decision they want. They could say, we're going to move it from one project to another. They could supersede any of our likes and dislikes or our recommendations. They have the ultimate choice over that. So our next step following this, maybe to clear, is what we're doing here today allows the MAPS program staff to write a contract, which then will come back to the MAPS advisory board, first to the subcommittee, then to the advisory board, and then to city council, correct?
Well, based on timing, we're going to try and do that, but because of lead times, we're going to do our best to get there. I'd like to point out, though, that your comment about council takes what this board does very seriously and appreciates everything that's discussed so that they know that it's been vetted. So don't think that they don't take your decisions into consideration in what they do.
I didn't mean to elude that. They have a larger brain trust, if you will, than what we know. Certainly, the information that we received from Mr. Freeman today, sheds a lot better light. And I've certainly been at other city meetings, especially when it was a kickoff of the general obligation bond meeting. Our city manager, Jim Couch, talked about that, there were some MAPS projects that were underfunded, and we're going to need some money. To the tune of what was reported on the slide was $10 million for the park. So we've talked about these things. I don't think it's a surprise, but it's all in what we think our best recommendation is.
Just remember, though, that we're in a good position here, that we do have money. We're not sitting here talking about cutting it because we don't have money.
Yeah, and
So
Mike,
this is a great problem. Let's keep that in mind.
Mike, I was just going to say, too, that I think Bob has a really good point. I don't want you to vote against something that you support. You said you supported going forward with this, but you wouldn't if it was taken from the contingency funds. And maybe Zane feels the same way, and I'm just saying there's no reason that we can't share with the council that there are differing views about what money ought to be used, if any. And I'm perfectly amenable to us, as David said, sharing those ideas, that there's more than one way to look at this, but we do need to move forward on whether or not we're going to accept the contract.
I know there's a motion on the table, I understand that, but we could have also had a motion on the table to accept the bid, just as was made, and then have a separate motion on someone making a motion on using contingency funds for the alternates. That would pass or die. Or another motion to use money within the budget of the park already, i.e. Michael's suggestion, and that could live or die. And that way, we could accomplish both. Is that not true?
I think that's where we are. I think the motions on the table is just to approve the project without discussing funding.
It's to include the alternates, Michael.
Yeah, but it's not, the motion on the table is not discussing the funding mechanism.
Yes, Michael, I don't disagree with you that there are many ways that we could have gone about this. The way that we have gone about it is to follow the recommendation of the park subcommittee and to do it the way they did it. That isn't unusual for us to do, is to have a recommendation from the subcommittee and then to follow it. I'm amenable to that, but we do have a motion to deal with, and if there isn't, is there any other discussion? I have a couple of comments I wanted to make, but and if that motion doesn't work, we'll try something else. Is anything you want to be heard again?
I'm with Mike. I can't support this. I love the park, and I want it to go forward, but I can't support the ad alternates at this time.
I think that's fine. Anybody else? Well, I'll add this. I'm going to vote aye. The measure that I've tried to use as we've gone through this whole process over 7 years is, what is it going to take to achieve our goal? We came in on the Whitewater, and we knew we could not achieve our goal with the money we had. And we made recommendations, difficult recommendations. It was a 5-4 vote in the council. But we built the Whitewater, and we accepted that bid because, and again, we only had one bidder. You all know I chair the Convention Center subcommittee, so I am not one who is here as an advocate for the park. But in a real sense, I am an advocate for the park. The park is the most transformational, the most visible project that we have had for 7 years. We have gone around presentations, and probably nobody's made more than I have, about the park, about MAPS 3. And in every one of them, that visual has included the fountain. Every one of them, it has. I am not necessarily advocating for every ad alternate. I trust the fact that the park subcommittee and Hargraves have worked through that. But when you think about the park by virtually any measure, it is going to be the most transformational. It will achieve the goal more than any other of spurring economic development. And that's a major goal of MAPS. And are we doing something that we haven't done before? Well, when we knew that we could not achieve our goal with sidewalks, Sue was happy to accept another $9 million from the council out of excess funds because we simply were not going to achieve our goal if we didn't do that. When we knew that we could not achieve our goal with the modern streetcar, when we had to reroute it because of moving the convention center, we had to add money. When we knew we were going to have to move the convention center to achieve our goal, we had to use some additional money. And my point with you is, we will not achieve our goal in making this the centerpiece, the cornerstone of what the citizens of Oklahoma City believe we're going to do if we do not accept this bid and go forward with these alternates. And I think there is no alternative to waiting to see if we can do it. And no one will be dealing with that more than me. We haven't bid the convention center. So I understand that Sue and I are going to be suffering a lot of problems, but the standard with me is, can we achieve our goal without doing this? And the answer is, we need to do this to achieve our goal. That's why I'm voting yes. Go ahead, Mike.
Tom, I don't disagree. I agree with everything you just said, and I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about not understanding or supporting these add-ons. I think the issue is about the funding of them. And I think there's got to be a way that we should be able to support funding them as well.
I agree with you. My only point is, we have been told that the money is there. If the council chooses not to give us the money, then we'll make whatever adjustments we did. That's what we did have to do in the Whitewater, as you'll remember. We're not building a grandstand at the Whitewater facility because we didn't have the money. And if they tell us that we don't have excess money, then we'll come back and do whatever we have to do.
Just a little additional comment. As a lawyer, I recognize that any issue worthy of debate has good arguments to be made on each side, and I'm glad we've had the opportunity to listen to that. I favor the motion because I start from the proposition that we can be comfortable that from some source the money will be there. Then the debate becomes, and perhaps ultimately for City Council, which source do they want to use, but I'm comfortable from what we've heard today in our discussions in past months that the money is there from some source. And I see these alternates not unlike number 9, the water main replacement. We really need to do them now to get the greatest advantage, best price, and the best bang for our buck in doing it. All of these are very valuable add-ons. In probably all of our projects, we've done value engineering where we cut back on some things because we weren't sure that we could do them. We tried to add them back in when it became apparent we could. And I don't know if these were value engineered out originally, if they're part of the original or whatever, but I think they're all valuable additions to the park. And the park, along with the convention center, I think are the two core gems of our MAPS overall project. And I think it is essential that we maximize what we can do with the park and ultimately the convention center. And so I'm in favor at this point of approving the motion to accept the bid and the alternatives except number 8. And then we can talk about where we fund it.
I'm in favor of this motion, and the reason that I want to include everything is I think it's just up to our standards, and we've been careful about our standards of what our plan is, what the projects coming forward. I think it's okay that we're using contingencies now. I don't remember when we did December discussion that we said we weren't going to use contingencies. We just said we weren't ready to say there was a 5th wellness center. So that's what I took away from that one. But I also am very proud of the contingencies for all of the different projects that we've done so far. And I think they are in line with what we promised that we would bring forward. And we've got to have this standard up to this level for this park. It's visible. It will be our icon forever, more so than Whitewater. So I want you to know that I'm in favor of it too.
I take a little different take, I guess, from the December discussions, because I think we did talk about were we ready to start allocating large sums of our contingencies and excess funds until we had more information about the park and about the convention center and other things. And so I'm in favor of the motion of moving this forward. I am going to debate or discuss the alternative on how to fund it. And I think we had decided that we wanted to remain flexible and we wanted to see get all the kind of numbers we could before we made any large allocations out of our excess funds. And I still feel that way. I think at this point in time that I think we need to work within the committee to fund this, and in 6 months or a year we'll know a lot more about where we are in the convention center. We'll know what the needs are in the lower park. We'll know where we are in trails and any other committees that still have wishes, and we'll get all those on the table and we make those decisions. But if we make the decision now to take the money out of the excess collections, and we limit our options later, and I don't think we have to do that at this time. So,
But when we've discussed ad alternates on the past, we've done that not in conjunction with the motion to pass the original construction bill or the contract to proceed with it. It's been as ad alternates. And even within our subcommittee for streetcar, we've discussed ad alternates, things that we think we have to have, things that we'd like to have, but we've never come forward and submitted them with the bid for the cars or with the bid for the rail.
We have done this on some other projects, though. And the reason why we have these alternates on there is because we were designing within the amount of money that we had, within knowing that we needed these things in here. And these things still meet within the original PIP budget. We're still within that. It's just the underfunded part of it that Ms. Lois talked about, where we had to do all the utilities and then some of the extra things for revenue enhancement. So this isn't unprecedented as far as bringing alternates here.
David, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is money in the budget. The city council hasn't passed an upper park and a lower park budget, just like we've...
Yes, it's broken into upper and lower.
It is broken into upper and lower?
Yes. Which is exactly why this comes to this board as a 7-to-1 recommendation from the Parks Subcommittee, that this is the most responsible way to ask for it. If we ask for it the way that you're saying, Mike, it's very sensible, but we would knowingly defund a project way in advance, knowingly, putting it at huge jeopardy to even say, can we build a lower park? What could we do?
Because remember, it's not an issue of how much money is available at the time we bid it, but as we go through design, we have to know what that budget's going to be.
exactly, and that's exactly what was done in the upper park. You designed a park within the budget, but you put ad alternates in to get what you wanted, and the same thing can be done in the lower park.
Well, again, the only reason I'm voting against this because I think we're voting it without knowing how we're going to fund it.
Well, as Bob says, we're voting it knowing the funds are available, and someone can decide where that's going to be. We'll debate that. All right, is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion carries. You have another recommendation, Kim?
In order to fund the said construction contract for project M3P006, as outlined in our above recommendation, we recommend utilizing MAPS 3 program contingency funds for the amount in deficit.
All right, is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Well, shall we begin the discussion? All right.
Just one question before the discussion on the motion, and do I understand correctly that within this budget, we have built in the project contingency, and what we're talking about now in this motion is using program contingency money. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah, there's still a little more than $4.4 million, about $4.2 million in project contingency that is not in this.
But your motion is to talk about max contingency, not program contingency.
Program is max, not project contingency.
Okay, that's the verbiage.
Well, I think I've made my point, and so I'm going to continue down that road and suggest that we fund it from the parks budget itself at this point in time, knowing that we have the excess money available and I'm no way wanting to limit what's ultimately done in the lower part, but I just think we need to get a lot more information on the table before we decide how we go about spending large sums of the excess collections and program contingency.
Anyone else?
The only thing that I would, again, like to add is the anticipation, or speculation, if you will, however you want to look at it, that when Hargraves returns to our subcommittee next month to bring us a revised preliminary report for the lower park based on our commentary from our review of the preliminary plan, we're already $5 million or more short on what we're going to need with the current budget that's in the lower park. So we're going to have these discussions ahead. And that's exactly why we felt yesterday that the responsibility isn't to take from a project that's already suffering and make it worse off, but to try to hopefully work within the budget that's remaining for the lower park and fill the need for what we have on this park right now to deliver something that our operator knows will bring them the most success in funding those operations.
And I think that's exactly the type of information that I think we need to have to make the decisions to use the excess funds. Where are we on these other projects? How much more is going to be asked for? What's the real number we need? And not piecemeal this out and limit our options and flexibility later.
One more comment. If we do that, I commit today to make sure that we bring forth $5.2 million to the lower park.
And that need may be greater. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not.
Right.
I don't do this. I'm just John Q. Public, trying to spend those pennies the best way that I think is in everyone's best interest. So that need could be greater.
Yeah. But I do think that we need to have that commitment for the lower park. I think it's important. And I'm very concerned about taking that money away from lower park.
David, a question for you. I know you do not control the city council agenda. We obviously have a good number of differing views here about how it should be funded. We have now voted to send the recommendation about accepting the bid and the ad alternates. Now, on the issue of the money, may we assume that Craig and the city council, they're well aware of the revenue situation, the opportunities that are available, the excess funds. They would know as much or more about that than we do, right?
They do know how it operates. I don't know that today they know exactly what the numbers are, but they have seen them and are aware of how it works. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just thinking about Bob's point that if the point is that the money's available, what money do they want to use, if any? We want to convey to them what this Citizens Advisory Board, but I'm thinking that they have the same information we do.
Let me ask a question. Perhaps Mike is the one that could answer it. If we were to take the $5 million from the lower park now and allocate it back to the upper park, or at least express our preference that this body would do it that way, what, if any, impact does that have on the engineering and architecture that's already been done? Do we spend another $200,000 in engineering fees because Hargraves has to go back to square one and start redesigning? If so, we're wasting a couple of $100,000 of engineering work that's already been done. By following, when Mike was first talking, I was leaning that direction and saying, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to defer the contingency question until later, as we've done many times before. But if that is, maybe 2 steps forward but 2 steps back at the same time, I'm not sure I would favor that. So I'm curious to know what we lose if we were to make that decision about reallocating within the park project itself.
There are some significant impacts, and I'm actually not up here to go into those. I'm going to ask Lo Runkle from my staff, who's very familiar with this project, to come up and give you some of the ramifications.
Okay, good, thank you.
Currently, Hargrave's contract states that they are designed at $20.5 million in the lower park. We have the PDR in. Their base price in the lower park is the $20.5, and there are currently $4 million worth of alternates in the lower park PDR. So if we do move money from the lower park, we will pay Hargraves to redesign, and it will be in likelihood from PDR through the entire documents, and they will, I think $200,000 is probably conservative. They will probably ask for more than that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, with that additional information, I think that, to me, it's a close question, but I think it tips me back toward the idea of going ahead and approving the use of program contingency funds to do the things that we've now approved, recommending to the City Council. If the total numbers indicated that our available contingency funds by the end of the program would be 10 or 12 or 13 million, I'd be very uncomfortable in doing that with the convention center sitting out there. But with the 37 or so that is projected, taking 5 of that right now, I think still leaves me a pretty good comfort zone that we have the ability to deal with those contingencies yet to come, and still perhaps have contingent funds available for some of the wish list items that we have on the various projects that we have going.
Is there some reason that we ought to be thinking as the excess collections differently than we think about the contingency funds? I mean, I know the contingency is budgeted and the excess has not been budgeted. Are we thinking about those as fungible? Or?
I think that's the major distinction is that, but still, we still have collections to come, so there's, it's still out there, it's still projected.
We only have 7.4 million in contingency fund. So this would eat up almost all the contingency, but we do have excess collections. So,
right.
I mean, that's maybe semantics, maybe it's not. I mean, in my mind, it's kind of semantics, but
Well, it was.
But I just wonder, sometimes we've said we're going to take them out of excess collections, sometimes we've said we're going to take it out of contingency funds.
Well, that's
and
what I was
taking out different buckets.
That's what I was thinking about in Kim's motion. I think about these funds are available to do all that we need to do for MAPS 3. Should we be so specific as to say to take it out of the contingency funds, or because the excess funds are just basically the same thing? It seems like they're fungible.
Right. You could ask council to take it from excess collections and/or excess contingency and/or excess collections.
And I would be amiable to revise the resolution to say that they be either taken from program contingency and/or excess collection funds.
Do you want to amend your motion to that?
For me, it doesn't matter. Those funds would be available either way. So.
I think so too, Mike.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It does give the council a little more flexibility, though, Kim.
Well, and it shows them that we're also vetting it as well and looking at all of the alternatives that seem to be the most responsible. If we had another $50,000, $60,000 in the lower park budget, I think our decision yesterday would have been different. But we already know that this seems to be the most prudent course because of what we do now.
And one last comment. I'll just go back to the River Subcommittee, and we were faced with a funding shortfall there, and we dealt with it within our budget, and if you looked at the slide a while ago, I mean, there's 2 whole phases of our project we have no funding for. So, I mean, that was kind of the road we started out in. It seemed to me like we were instructing the committees to deal with their issues within their projects, and that we would deal with, and then we reiterated last December that we would deal with all the wants and needs in a larger body when we had all the facts and figures, and that's still where I stand. So.
And
Am I
originally,
mistaken, or did we step away from that when we spent the $800,000 for the bridge? Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking about Mike's point. The $800,000 that we gave the river for the bridge, where did that come from?
That was from excess collection.
All the way we did that.
Okay.
And originally, the upper park was in 2 phases. But in order for economies of scale and greater savings, we consolidated that into one project. So we could be looking at this in 3 phases. But again, we asked the council to please let us combine those for those reasons.
Okay, did I interrupt you, Kim? You were about to do something?
I said that I would be more than happy and would like to change the recommendation to that the funds become either from project contingency, program contingency, and/or excess collections.
And Amanda, are we procedurally correct? She's amended her motion, the seconder has approved it. All right. So we now have a clear choice. Everybody understand the motion? Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Let me think here. What did we hear? All right, there are 3 noes, 1, 2, 3, 4 ayes. All right, the ayes have it. It is adopted. Is there a further item on the agenda, David?
Just comments.
Just comments. All
Comments
right.
from board.
Mr. Talbert, I've noticed you standing a couple of times. We've taken the action. Would you like to comment on it? All right, thank you. Any other comments from members of the board? Staff comments? All right. Other citizens here? David, why don't you introduce the representative of the contractor that we're moving forward? Would you do that?
I'll introduce him. I don't think he wants to get up, but David Vaughn is here. David is from Downey Contracting. He was the senior superintendent at the Whitewater and directed all the construction out there and did a fantastic job, and we're glad to see him here. I think he's ready to go.
David, I want to say a personal word of thanks for bringing that Whitewater in timely. We were under tight time constraints, and you guys really turned to. Delighted to know that you still wanted to do this big project for the city and offer our congratulations. The groundbreaking is currently scheduled for June the 29th. Am I right about that?
10 a.m. June 29th.
10 a.m. June
at
the
Union
29th.
Station. Are you going to be out of town? I'll Skype you in. I'll Skype you in. FaceTime. We can get you there.
Yes. As you know, we've had a very open process, and that process has been ongoing, and we expect to announce a name that will have emerged from a lot of contenders from the public. And so this is a landmark day for the park. Look forward to see what the council does. If there's no further business, we're adjourned. Thank you.